Go. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I know we're at 1 o'clock. I'm going to maybe wait 1 or 2 more minutes just to let anyone else trickle in. And then for the sake of time, we'll get started with today's event. Since it is a small group with the audience, if you'd like, I believe you have access to the chat. You're welcome to introduce yourself, maybe your position or what you're studying in the chat if you'd like. Maybe no takers on that. All right. Oh, maybe someone's writing there. Okay. Well, while you introduce yourselves in the chat, I'm going to get us started. We have a great session planned for you today. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm Julie Jonkins. I'm the Training and Research Manager at BioCanRx, and I'm really pleased to be moderating this panel today. For those of you who may not be familiar with BioCanRx, we're a national nonprofit that supports Canada's leading cancer immunotherapy researchers in advancing their discoveries to the clinic. And BioCanRx is located in Ottawa, Ontario, and we'd like to acknowledge that we're situated on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And we acknowledge and respect our traditional hosts and thank them for allowing us to operate on this land. The Where Are They Now series is our way of showcasing the career journeys of individuals who were once trainees within our network, like our audience, and have since moved into professional roles. And when we think about developing new cancer therapeutics or any sort of new therapeutic, the first role that might come to mind is a researcher working at the bench. But I wanted everyone to understand that bringing new therapeutics to patients takes a wide variety of people and roles who all bring unique expertise and knowledge and skills to the process. And so for today's panel, we really wanted to highlight 3 individuals who are making important and meaningful contributions along the full research translational continuum and showcase the many ways that the expertise that you develop in your studies can help turn promising science into real-world treatments. So I'm really pleased to introduce our 3 panelists today. First, we have Abdelhamid Elsherbiny. He's a therapy specialist at C3I with extensive experience in aseptic manufacturing of cell and gene therapy. His mixed background in pharmaceutical sterile production and molecular biology has allowed him to excel in the cellular therapy field. And he has a proven track record of bringing new ideas to every place he has worked, resulting in more efficient teamwork and resource utilization. And hopefully we can hear a little bit more about that in your discussion. We have Alice Lau, Translational Research Manager at the BC Multiple Sclerosis Cell Therapies Translational Research Network at the University of British Columbia, where she's leading initiatives that bridge the gap between bench discovery and clinical application by developing an early phase clinical trial unit to serve the research community in the Vancouver area. Alice received her Ph.D. in immunology from UBC and has since then completed postdoctoral training in cardiovascular and cancer immunotherapy fields at Ottawa. She's pivoted her career journey from bench to a more business-oriented direction, working closely with colleagues from UBC Faculty of Medicine and leadership from hospitals to realize the vision of increasing early phase trial capacity in BC. And last but not least, we have Brett Wang, a senior scientist on the TCR team in oncology cell therapy at AstraZeneca in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where he leads an allogeneic neoantigen-specific TCR-T project and drives its progression through preclinical development stages. In addition to project leadership, he collaborates cross-functionally to shape strategies that complement the broader preclinical oncology cell therapy portfolio. Prior to joining AstraZeneca in 2023, he completed his Ph.D. and postdoctoral training under Dr. Nato Hirano at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center, where he focused on developing TCR and CAR-T cell therapies targeting antigenic peptides presented by MHC class II. mouthful of bios there, very accomplished and successful individuals here. And hopefully that didn't steal the show. I'm sure that you can provide a little more context and insight into each of those roles, although in your bios, you've already done a great job of highlighting the work that you do. Just in terms of format, I have a few questions that I will be posing to each of our panelists to provide some insight into their roles and their career paths. And then hopefully we have some time at the end for our audience members to ask questions either through the Q&A or the chat functions to make sure that you get the most out of this session. So I will start turning the floor over to the panelists, and I'm hoping that we can start with you, Brett. Knowing that you work in R&D and industry, maybe the most familiar environment to many of our audience members. Can you share a little bit about what your role involves and maybe compare and contrast how industry research differs from academic research?
Yeah, of course. As you mentioned in the introduction, so basically my main responsibility is that I am leading a pipeline project. So a pipeline project, just you can think of it as just a drug candidate that the company is trying to move towards the clinic and eventually to the market. So my responsibility is to drive that project from the discovery stage all the way to the IND stage. So my main project is I'm developing T-cell therapy, off-the-shelf allogeneic T-cell therapy against neoantigens for solid tumors. And so that's my main project. But in addition to that, I also work with many different teams within cell therapy discovery department. So we work on several projects to really complement the overall cell therapy portfolio. So I would say it's because this is a bench role, so I still spend probably about 60 to 70% of my time in the lab doing experiments. Another 30-40% of the time is mainly for data analysis, for admin stuff, and also a lot of meetings with different teams. So that's one thing that's very different from doing research in academia is it's not like you're working on your own thing. You have maybe one or two things that you can focus on. Not really. So here so I have maybe 5 or 6 different projects and I work with many different people. So you really have to be able to work with people and you have to be very adaptable because things happen very fast. That's another thing. Pace is very different from doing research in academia. Like things get prioritized or deprioritized very fast. So maybe in the beginning of the year, we set out to do these 5 projects. In the middle of the year, it would switch to completely different projects. So that's very normal. The third biggest difference, I think, between academia and industry, doing research in industry or academia I guess, like for academia, we're always trying to answer basic questions. For industry, like even though they say that, we're trying to help patients, we're trying to address these unmet medical needs, they all sounds great, but at the end of the day, it's profit driven, right? So it's something that you have to keep in mind is that the company will not advance anything or they will not be interested in anything that will not make money. And that's just the reality. So that means that sometimes your project get deprioritized, not because of bad science, it's just because the competitive landscape has shifted or, just the regulatory environment is different. So, or just simply the company decided to reallocate their resources to something else. So yeah, you just have to be, quick to adapt. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And so it sounds like there's much more external constraints that are kind of guiding the direction of the research versus academia, where you have a bit more liberty to pursue those ideas. And I'm just wondering for our audience, do you mind defining IND and just providing a bit of a context of what that means when you talk about IND studies, preclinical studies?
Yeah. So basically, IND is investigational new drug application. So that's basically the stage before the clinical stage. So what I do is basically, so there are actually like a lot more stages or milestones that we have to reach uh, within the discovery department. And so, for example, we first start with target selection. In the case of a TCR, you will identify a target, and then the next stage is lead optimization. So what you're doing is basically you're trying to find out the best TCR against that target. And then the next stage will be clinical development, right? So basically, this is when you will start working with many different departments, and safety department, process development, so the manufacturing department, working together to kind of to generate the optimal product that will be going into the clinic. So IND stage is basically kind of like the last stage of this preclinical discovery pipeline. That's basically when you need to do all the necessary experiments to generate the data package, and then you will submit to, in this case, FDA to request for an approval. And if you get an IND approval, that's when you can start testing your drugs in phase 1.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think that's a great segue maybe over to Abdelhamid, who you can maybe provide some context to your work at a CDMO and what that means in the ecosystem and what your role is within that context.
Yes, so I'll start where Brett ends. So the main focus of the biopharmaceutical company is to investigate a potential cell-based therapy drug. So usually the laboratory procedure that they are using, they are not subjected to stringent regulation because this drug is not given to any patient. But as the therapy advances to clinical stages and ultimately to commercial production, here comes the role of a CDMO. It provides the service of development and manufacture of cell-based therapy, and it translates this laboratory-based procedure into a compliant procedure that respects the industry regulation that to ensure patient safety. This is the role. They have the expertise, they have the established procedure, they have the proper facility and the suitable equipment that can translate all this laboratory procedure into a compliant procedure. My role is involving all aspects of production, writing the batch record, which is the instruction how to perform the procedure to produce the drug, writing what we call SOP, standard operating procedure. It's a detailed instruction of how to perform tasks. And in the industry, as you may notice, in contrast to laboratory, we try to minimize variation between individual performing the same task. That's why we have a very detailed instruction that is called the standard operating procedure. My role also train staff on how to use equipment. We are using a sophisticated equipment to do cell processing like selection, growing. So my role involved training staff on using this equipment and also to respect the good manufacturing practice, which ensure patient safety. This is pretty much my role. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So you're taking those new ideas and getting them to more of the quality and safety standard we actually need to put into patients, which I think
Exactly.
is going to lead well into our final panelist. Alice, if you want to share a little bit about your role and how it has fit within the research ecosystem where you are.
So my role is to, in a nutshell, is to develop a business plan so we can build an early phase clinical trials unit in the Vancouver Lower Mainland. So for those of you who are not as familiar with clinical trials, basically a clinical trials unit, so a CTU, is a specialized biomedical research unit that provides investigators access to share services and technologies, as well as expert consultations for clinical trials. So you can think of it as like a core facility, right? So where the people who want to conduct clinical trials, they can come in and either use our space or our expertise or both. So an early phase CTU further tailors those resources to conduct phase 1 or phase 2 or combine phase 1-2 trials. So when the MS network, so I work for the MS BC MS Cell Therapies Translational Research Network. Is a handful, but I'm going to shorten it as the BC MS Network. So when the network was established in late 2022, which was made possible by a private donation to UBC Faculty of Medicine, we discovered there was a huge gap in our process's ability to bring lead molecules from the bench to the bedside when for discovery. So for phase 1 first in human trials. So while BC is leading, has a leading role in clinical trials in Canada, so we actually encompass about 25% of the clinical trials that are currently being conducted in Canada. Only 1.7% of those active trials are phase 1s. So most phase 1s actually happen in Eastern Canada because of their dedicated facilities. So this is an issue because then we've got this blooming biotech in BC who's like making new, having new discoveries, new R&Ds, making new cell and gene-based therapies, but nowhere to test it. So, and the reason is because phase 1 faces unique challenges, right? So phase 1 is first in human. It's very challenging for safety and regulatory regulations. Regulations are more stringent, so the patients need to be monitored clock to clock, preferably in a hospital setting with emergency code blue. So which means you need bed space. So we don't have that currently in Vancouver Lower Mainland, except for like except for the oncology space. So this lack of access has led many people to seek out of province or even out of country care. And we don't want that, right? We want to create access. We want to bring hope to patients and their families, especially in diseases that are incurable and progressive. So such as like ALS or progressive forms of MS or dementia. So then it became a shared vision between the MS Network and the UBC Faculty of Medicine to create the infrastructure that allows these patient access. Our goal is to close the gap between research and care. So my role is to create a sound business proposal that highlights the problem, which is that we don't have the capacity, and then the proposed solution, which is to build an infrastructure for it and conduct market research, establish our unique value proposition, project for cost and revenue, and highlight the potential risk and how can we mitigate those risks. So ultimately, my role is to convince the hospital leaderships to become on board and to grant us the space and resources needed to build a clinical trials unit.
Thank you so much for sharing all that context. So while maybe not at the bench, you're still very influential in making sure that people on the West Coast are getting access to those up and coming novel therapies. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And maybe for the next question, I'll stay with you, Alice. Can you talk a little bit about your career journey from doing the bench work, the PhD, the postdoc, into more of this role where you're doing more strategic and influential activities?
So I didn't know why I was going to do this when I was growing up, obviously. I had your typical wet lab experience. So my background was in microbiology, immunology. I really love infectious diseases immunology. So then I did a PhD in studying tuberculosis in the context of vaccine development. Yes, TB is still a valid disease, even in Canada. But then unexpectedly, after I got my PhD, I moved to Ottawa for family reasons, and I actually switched field. I joined a lab in congenital heart disease. So that was my postdoc. So I was still doing bench work, but it got me thinking more and more about the so what question, right? Like, yes, I'm making discoveries in the bench, but what does it mean ultimately in the hands of the patients? So I wanted to get more and more into that translational setting. And then I found myself really missing immunology. So then I joined Dr. Rebecca Auer's lab as a MyTex postdoc, where a large part of the job was to work with an industry partner to design a phase 2 clinical trials. So I got my foot into the clinical trials area, and then I was dividing my time between bench and clinical trial activities. And again, life brought me back to the West Coast. I came back to Vancouver, and I was so lucky to see this job opening with the MS Network, where I can move into more of even more so the clinical trial space and also develop a set of business acumen, because that was another thing that I was really interested in as I was like growing up, so to say. Because I think a lot of the times for trainees, we don't really think about money, we don't think about revenue, we just know that our PI has a grant, we spend it, we make discoveries, we publish. And then as I was getting into clinical trials, I realized it's so much more than that, right? It's about like you need to learn how to budget for trial studies and how much the hospital will charge and then how we can negotiate with sponsors. So I just got really interested in the business aspect as well. So this is a really unique role that I landed because it got me thinking about the business side of discoveries and clinical trials. It also got me to learn to think more strategically, right? Because part of the purpose of a business plan is that you are trying to convince people for buy it. You're trying to convince people to come on board with you so you can establish something together.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I hope in the additional questions, we can drill in some of those skills, those professional skills a bit further. Maybe over to you, Brett, if you want to share a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up in your current role.
Yeah, my career journey, it's pretty straightforward. I pretty much just applied while I was doing my postdoc. But I did when I was a PhD student, I did explore a bunch of different career options because I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in R&D. So I tried a bunch of things like consulting, business development, MSL related roles. So and I talked to a lot of people to kind of figure out what I want or don't want to do. And then eventually I decided to stay in R&D because I'm still pretty interested in research. So that's why I started looking for jobs. Initially I was looking at jobs in Canada, but opportunities were limited, and I was open to moving to the States. So I started looking for opportunities in the States as well. So I think overall I probably applied for 40 to 50 positions, and I was mainly focusing on cell therapy positions in biotechs or in pharma. And I got maybe 10 interviews, and then eventually got 3 offers, and one of them was AstraZeneca. So yeah, that's basically what I did. I just apply, interview, and then I was fortunate enough to get this job. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And hopefully we have time at the end. I have a question about any advice that you have in the job search. So we'll come back around to that. And Abdelhamid, would you like to share your education and career path to how you ended up in your role?
Yeah, so I have a mixed background. So I have a Bachelor of Pharmaceutical Science from Cairo University, and I really like the science part more than the pharmacy part. So, and I was fascinated by we studied, generics at the School of Pharmacy, and I like to continue, but this domain in Egypt is not really well developed. So I applied for immigration. I came here and I applied for diploma in biotechnology and genetics at Concordia, and it was a very beautiful. I learned a lot, and it makes me, continue to do a master in molecular biology, further study, genetics and role of DNA repair pathways. And since this mixed background from pharmaceutical to the science, it allows me, okay, so what can combine this is to work into research. So I first started working in a CRO, clinical research organization. We are doing immunoassay. And when I saw a chance to join a cell therapy, which my background, mixed background, can benefit a lot from this, I jumped in, and I really like to work in my current company. I've been working for 4 years, and throughout my career, what I like about working in the manufacturing is that you always have a challenge, a problem solving, and this, motivates you to continue to improve yourself and to challenge yourself.
That's great. So actually, maybe we can pick up from there on what type of skills or personalities fit well with a career in manufacturing. Can you maybe expand a little bit more on the strengths or the skills that are needed in that type of work?
Okay, the first skill you need to have is to be able to work in a group. So usually in the manufacturing, you are dealing with different departments, and usually in the manufacturing, there are 2 person at least performing or executing the manufacturer activity. One perform and the other one is checking. So you have to create a low stress environment because there is a lot of challenges and there is a lot of situation that comes up during the manufacture. So you have to be first very focused to the details, because if you try to skim the instruction, you can end up doing error, and it's a costly error. You know that the production of cell-based therapy is very costly. It can reach up to $500,000. So you have to be sharp, focused, be able to work in a team, in a harmony, and be responsible. Any mistake you do, you have to report it to your supervisor, because it touch life of a person. It's given to people who are really have weak immune system, and it can affect their health. So you have to be responsible, and don't be afraid to share that you have done a mistake. It's all people do mistake, but the bad thing is not to say.
Yeah. So it's in the sake of the quality and safety of the product, you need to
Exactly.
be accountable to. Yeah, great. Thank
Exactly.
you. And I know in a previous conversation, we talked a little bit about the importance of understanding current regulations and how that impacts the manufacturing.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that and the importance of that for these roles?
Yeah. So the situation is different for me, because I studied in the Bachelor of Pharmaceutical Science. We study quality system, we study quality control, we study good manufacturing practice, which is the regulation that govern the production of medicine. So I know that people from scientific background here, they don't have this opportunity to learn about it. So I would recommend anyone that is interested to join in the cell-based therapy field to go and take online courses about the good manufacturing practice, about the aseptic technique, about the documentation practice, about the regulation. And if they have a chance to have hands-on experience on any equipment that are used during the manufacturing, I would highly recommend this, because usually the recruiter will prefer someone who has this background and will pick them over any other student who doesn't have this background. They will always pick the person who worked in a regulated environment.
Great, thank you. It's highly specialized expertise in that context. And to our audience members, if you want any resources related to that, I'm happy to share that afterward. Maybe over to you, Brett, if you want to share in your intro, you kind of talked about how priorities are often shifting and they're driven by business and those kind of decisions. So can you maybe share a little bit about what the environment is like in the industry and what types of skills and strengths do well in that environment?
Yeah. So first of all, I guess, so for example, it depends on your research skill sets. So I guess that will determine the type of research jobs that we'll be looking at. So yes, you need to have the core wet lab skills, right? In the context of cell therapy, that would be, cell culturing, flow cytometry, molecular biology, those type of things. So of course the core skills are important, but then I think two other things are very important, and I kind of mentioned that a little bit just now. One is the ability to adapt, right? So you just basically need to be used to the very fast-paced environment. Things are always changing. And the second thing I think it's very important is the ability to work with people. And that means be able to also communicate well with people. Because I think a lot of people in academia, they're not great at doing that. And, like people who, at least for the past 2 point something years while I was here, the people who ended up leaving, usually the main reasons because they couldn't work well with other people. And because in the industry, right, like I said, you are working on 5, 6 different projects with so many different teams. So you really need to be able to communicate well with other people and try not to have, a huge ego like a lot of people do. They kind of bring their ego to the industry. That never works well. So yeah, just kind of have to adjust the expectations for that. Yeah.
And if we can just maybe zoom in a little further on those communication skills, because I'm just curious, is this like in a meeting presenting data to team members, or is this like collaborating on experiments? What types of communication skills are different from the academic setting?
So it's mainly, both from running experiments, or from actually communicating to different teams in terms of, because usually it's a big project broken down to many parts, and then each team or each individual is contributing just to a small part. So so it's very important to let other people know that what you want and what you're expecting from the other teams, right? Because usually for me, even for my main project, I'm getting support from maybe 3 or 4 different teams. So it's very important to communicate the priority timeline and exact things that you want from them, just so you can kind of streamline everything. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So more of that project management and coordinating across various roles and people in the team. Great, thank you. And Alice, over to you. Again, similarly, you've kind of mentioned the different roles that you've worked within the hospital and research ecosystem, but can you comment on some of the skills that are beneficial in your role or that you've developed and find helpful in the strategic influence of your role?
So I resonate completely with what Brett and Abdelhamid was saying. The communication piece is very key. I think yes, coming from a research trainee setting, you are very used to focusing on your own project, and you're very good at your own project, right? You may be studying a very particular protein on one cell of your project. So you develop a niche for your expertise, but then you take that to a real work setting, and it's not about that because nothing happens in silos anymore, right? Especially for building a clinical trials unit, you need all these pieces to come together. You need to figure out like what would the regulatory requirement be needing? What would the medical oversight look like? How much we charge people for services and like that. There's no way that one person would know all of these ins and outs. So you need to learn to be resourceful. You need to learn to communicate with people and network and learn what they can do for you and what you can do for them in return. So it becomes a very cross-functional kind of relationship. And that skill was not something I really honed down when I was doing my research during my research days. So that, I think, is a really important skill set to have and to start developing if you could. And beyond that, what's really important would be the passion to do what you're doing. And yeah, it sounds super cliche, right? Like passion brings you success, but it's totally true. And I think for me, it's because I am really passionate about bridging that gap between research and care. I'm passionate about bringing life-changing therapies to patients in need. So if you have that in your mind, you will be more of a go-getter. You'll be able to knock on people's doors without hesitation and asking them to bring them onto your team to work together towards a common goal. And the other thing would be, again, I think I mentioned that before, is to think strategically. Is right as more of a business development setting. We need to be able to convince people to buy in, right? So you need to frame the problem that you're having and the solution in a way that's beneficial to all the parties that are involved. So, for example, for the institutions, for UBC is interested in reputation, in being a leader in research, right? The hospital may be interested in generating revenue. The individual investigators will be interested in discoveries and publications. So by framing your business proposal in that way, then you can get all these people to work together.
You have to really know your audience in order to persuade them. But I also love that comment too about the passion. You have to believe in something if you want to convince others to believe in it as well. And I think there is a connection between the passion in your work and performance. So thank you so much for highlighting all of those. But obviously one of the common denominators here is communication skills. And I'm thinking back to Abdelhamid, you mentioned, in your sector, people have to understand GMP and regulations, and that's a module maybe you can go take, or a course, or a hands-on training. But communication skills, it's a little more intangible. So I'm wondering if any of you have suggestions or advice for grad students or undergrads if they're in a lab. How can you work on or be more aware of those communication skills? Does anyone have ideas or suggestions?
Well,
I know I'm putting you all on the spot, but
yeah, for me, I think reading. the most important thing is to read, because it opens your vision on something that you never know, and to be aware of yourself. Being aware of yourself is the key to be able to deal with, to control yourself, control your emotion. So if you know yourself, it's gonna be easy. You have to know yourself. And this knowing, I think it's coming by experience and coming by reading, and have the mentality to, we don't change completely, but we adapt and change slightly. If you are in a state of freezing, that's not good. You have to change as you grow. And growing, I think it can be happen fastly by reading.
Okay, great. Thank you. Brett or Alice, anything to add?
So I heard this in a podcast where communication is a combination of like passion and or warmth and competency. So I think competency most of us have, being in doing like either masters or PhD, we've got that competency down. So and then it's about warmth. So I think now, especially in the days of digital world where you're doing a lot of Zoom meetings, so communication, it comes into, if you read a text, if you read a paragraph on the computer, how do you feel about that? So if you turn your position around and be on the receiver side of things, if you read an email without warmth, without pleasantry, without a clear goal of what that person wants from you and what that person is going to do for you and what is on the agenda, what has previously been done, what will be the action item that comes of that, then that communication is not really effective. So it comes down to, it also does come down to practice, right? So back then, you do everything in a lab setting, you have your own core group, you have your lab mates, you have your PI. So communication is very, like, you know each other, right? But how do you translate that to a grander setting where you don't know that person as well, you don't see them day to day, you might not be able to interact with them. It might be the first time they interacting with them. So learning that warmth is really important. And then also demonstrating your competency, demonstrating that you're organized, you say what you set out that you're going to do, and then be very clear on what everyone's role is. So that would be a key in communication.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Brett, do you have anything further to add?
Yeah, I mean, those are really good advice. I would say also, try to participate in some kind of, extracurricular activities. Try to talk to different audiences, and I kind of had to force myself to go to these like networking events. It was very uncomfortable, but then it's necessary and it's definitely helpful. So it helped you like talk to people who have very different background. And so I think it's a good practice. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all. Those are great pieces of advice. And I guess kind of continuing with the advice, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about any career advice you might have to get either into your specific field or generally about your career, that you would like to pass on to the audience members. So maybe Brett, if we can go back to you, is there any? I know you kind of said you applied to jobs and there was one that needed your expertise, but yeah, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. So the first is what I just mentioned, right? Like kind of just to work on your communication skills, to go talk to people. I highly recommend just kind of cold calling people on LinkedIn in a professional way. Don't just, add someone on LinkedIn, just at least like send a note, say, hey, I'm interested in a career. Can I, learn more about what you do? You're gonna get ignored a lot, but that's normal. It's fine. But it's really helpful. I mean, I did that a lot, and then that really helped me learn a lot more about different careers in the industry. So I think that's one thing, just, talk to people, learn from other people. Second is, I think, as he just said, again, reading is also very important. And I think if you are interested in let's say R&D jobs in the industry, you have to have a sense of what the industry is doing. So I like to read biotech pharma news, and I think that those are really very important. I recommend this website called Fierce Biotech or Fierce Pharma. I think maybe a lot of you already know this already. it does a really good job like covering what's happening in the industry, whether it's research, whether it's business development, whether it's VC deal or regulations. Like it's a great source of information. And when you apply for a research job in a company, it's very common for them to ask you, what do you know about what they're doing? So name a product, or like name what AstraZeneca has done in the cell therapy space. So you need to have those knowledge. So then you have to talk to people, or you have to do a lot of readings. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Those are great resources, and I've just shared links to those in the chat. Alice, would you like to share any advice you might have?
So I think Brett nailed it on the dot, about networking and LinkedIn, just asking, just knock on people's door and ask what they do. I actually had quite a positive experience of that. Like people that I connect with and I ask them about what they do, I get a response rate like 98% of the time. Yeah, I think people are just people love talking about themselves. They are very keen to share the career journey with you, especially, and that's essentially what we're doing here right on this panel, because we've gone through the struggle. We want to pass it forward and then give career advice. And so if you are in your trainee times, like master's, PhD, I urge you to start networking, like start talking to people in all kinds of areas, especially outside of the academic realm early on. Like don't start doing it when you're writing your thesis, because it takes time. It takes time to develop those relationships, right? It takes time to learn of what everyone does, and that it takes time for you to see an opening, a job opening. So for me, I was actually super lucky that MSI work was established. I saw this opening. This is literally one of the 2 jobs I applied to when I decided to move back to UBC, to Vancouver. So I really, really lucked out in that sense. But I know that the industry, for those of you who want to go into the industry, I know that the industry is super competitive. So what Brett has described, applying, what is it, like 40, 50 jobs, that's perfectly normal. So really do start looking ahead and talking to people about what they do, because now we've left the era where people they have very defined roles. When we were in elementary school, we learned that there's farmers, there's firefighters, there's doctors. It's no longer about that, right? Now people have very vaguely descriptive roles, like my job. When you hear, okay, translation research manager, what is that? Like, you really need to have talked to me to know that I am focusing more on the development side of things as opposed to doing research, like managing research in a lab setting. So talking to people, networking is the most important thing, I would say.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm going to put a link to our LinkedIn HQP network on LinkedIn. If the audience members have LinkedIn accounts, you're welcome to join there. And that's a great way to start making connections and reaching out to people in the field. Abdelhamid, any other thoughts on career advice?
Yeah, I think during school, if you are able to get an intern in a biotech company or in a manufacturing company, this will the first step to establish networking. And if you have a good impression with people after this, you will add all the skills to your CV. And I think, not, as I mentioned before, not many people in the science sector have this knowledge of the regulation. So if you can also get certification in this regulation from a decent training organization, that will help, because from hundreds of CV that are sent, you will have advantage that you already have the knowledge how to work in a regulated environment. This will make your chance higher than most of the people that don't have these skills. So have this certification and knowledge, and I think it's gonna make your chances higher.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been really insightful. I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there's any questions from our audience. Again, you can raise your hand and I think I can bring you off mute, or you can put a question in the Q&A or the chat. Maybe while we're waiting, Brett, if you don't mind, just if you're able to provide a little bit of insight, can you kind of compare and contrast, say, biotech from pharma, and what the environment? I realize maybe you haven't worked in both, but is there any insight you can provide into the difference between the two?
So yeah, so I guess I can only kind of comment on the pharma side, but I do have colleagues who came from biotech. So um, biotech is a lot more like the pace is even faster because they're constantly trying to generate data so they can provide to their investor to raise money to continue operating. Pharma, I guess in that sense, the pace is slower. But in biotech, the good thing about biotech though is that at least from the people I know, usually here in pharma, like I said, a big project, maybe 3, 4 different teams are working on it. So you're just contributing to one aspect. Whereas biotech, you might be just doing everything yourself. So from a learning perspective, it could be pretty beneficial. You can very quickly learn many different things, and then not just research. Even though you're like a research scientist, you can very quickly learn about manufacturing, about regulatory affairs. So it definitely can gain more exposure to different aspects in the drug development process. So I think that's kind of like the advantage of biotech. But again, of course, there's also in terms of job security, it's it's also not as good as pharma. So that's also one thing you have to consider. Yeah.
Mhm. Great, thank you. And I'm going to pause a minute. I think I see people typing, so I'll wait to see if a few questions come in the chat here.
Yeah, it's interesting what Brad, you said about kind of the compartmentalized aspect of pharma. So I do think that's one of the benefits of working in academia is that you get to there's not as many red tapes. Like you get to learn whatever you want to learn. So even though technically my role is research manager, but I got to learn about thinking strategically. I got to learn about the business aspect of things, and I'm being paid to learn what I want to learn. Isn't that super cool?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that perspective as well. I guess while we're waiting there, Alice, you kind of mentioned the business acumen aspect of your role. Were there any resources that helped you, or are you like a self-driven learner, or were there any courses or resources that you took to get up to speed on some of the business aspects?
I definitely had no formal training in business whatsoever. Like
Wow.
the only kind of business knowledge I have was balancing the sheets, like when I was working on clinical trials. So it was entirely self-driven. It was so well, of course we did have help when we were building the business proposal. I was like cost and revenue streams. We modeled some other successful CTUs proposals. So this is another area where reaching out and networking is very important because you don't ask, you don't get. So we actually just literally knocked on people's doors who have established a unit either outside of our country. So it was a place in the UK, or we knocked on people's doors who have just established, like in Montreal or like in other areas of BC that they're doing the same kind of endeavor. So we ask, and then they share with us their successful proposal. So that's kind of the fragmented piece of learning that I've been doing. I would love to learn in a more structured manner, but you do what you do.
Yeah, and I find PhDs and grad students in general are very fast learners and can pick up new concepts very easily. So it sounds like that was certainly one of your strengths as well. Abdelhamid, I'm not sure if you can comment on the question in the chat here, but about employment in Quebec when you're just English speaking and not necessarily French. Can you comment on that at all? Do you have to be bilingual to work at C3I, for example?
Well, it's better. So I speak French, yeah, because you are working in a French environment,
Mm-hmm.
and we are working. Your manager, your supervisor are all French, so it's gonna be easier for them to communicate. But there is cases where people who have, basic understanding of French and they work with us.
Mm.
It's better to have the the basic understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you are not fluent in communicating, but at least this will, increase your chances. But I think since the environment, it's the manufacturing itself is international, and you have to deal with the audit from extern. So most of the documents are written in English. Because you are expecting audit from Europe, from USA. So we write most of our document in English to make it easier.
Mm-hmm.
So there is chance, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But,
Makes sense,
start,
understandable.
Yeah.
Start brushing up.
Yeah,
get out your Duolingo and
yeah.
Great, thank you. I saw a hand go up, but now it went. Oh, okay. Let me see if I can take you off mute here. No. Okay, are you able to unmute yourself, Bishali? There we go. Okay, yes. Hello, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your career journey. That was really great. I keep struggling to find people on LinkedIn and like trying to talk to them and knowing like what they have done. I would like to get some more advice on like the transition period, like when from the lab. Grad student, I'm trying to go into the industry. Like when I read the job descriptions, there is always something missing. Like it's never like I meet all of those. So I feel like I should go for that training, this training, and that it distracts me like in all directions. So when I'm trying to make that transition, like what is the best way to do that? Like, do I have to fulfill like all of those points and just go there? If you can just say something about that.
Okay, so you have to know the company that you are working, what is the basic and most technique that they are using, and you write your CV. If you have this technique, you write your CV around this. If you have 70% of the skills and the core skill that this company is using in their facility, it's enough to get you in. When I applied for several roles, I always had one or two skills that is missing, but the core skill that is necessary, I have it, and I was chosen.
Okay, that makes sense. Yep. And one more thing is in my PhD, I have like worked with endothelial cells, like cell culture, a lot of those things. And I have done something completely different from my project, which is like taking a training in clinical research. I have like all those trainings and I have all the certifications, but I have never been able to like apply that knowledge in my research because my PhD is not about clinical research. So there is something missing again. Like I have the training, I have the knowledge, I have the certificates, but I have never applied that knowledge for my work. So that also makes it a bit difficult to like explain when I'm writing my CV or when I'm trying to reach out to someone to say that, well, I have the knowledge, but I have never worked, like I don't know where to start with, because if I don't get a chance to work somewhere outside my lab, I will never be able to apply any of those. And in like, it's like a chicken and egg problem, which one comes first? Like, I don't know, kind of stuck there.
Well, I think you have the chicken part. like having the certification is a huge bonus. Like even though you've never actually worked on it because you didn't have the chance to highlight that, write it on your resume, put it on your LinkedIn, right? Like so as what Abdelhamid said, if you don't have you feel like you're shy to apply because you don't have 100% of the skill set. Trust me, companies or anyone who's hiring will never get a candidate that they hit 100%. Because if they reach all the criteria, that person will already have a job somewhere else. Okay, as long as you meet, I would say like if you meet 50%, just apply. At the end of the day, it comes down to, so there are certain things you have to have, right? Like core like hard requirements. Hard requirements would be like if this really needs you to have a PhD, you need to have a PhD, right? But other things like it would always say things like expertise in this area is preferred. Well, then that's preferred. So because at the end of the day, it depends on who you're competing against in the pool of candidates, right? So it is a lot of it is dependent on luck. So just because you don't hear back from someone, it's not because you didn't hit 100% of the skill set. It's because you're simply the other person who hit 51% of the skill set and you hit 50.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Just I want to add one thing.
Yes, sure.
So when I was in my master, so my main skills that I was using is the flow cytometry. So when I finish my master and I want to look for a job, I don't write specialist, I write flow cytometry in the search bar. And it will give you all the job that requires, the top skills is flow cytometry. So find what is your strongest technical skill and write it in the search bar. And I think they have algorithm that goes and search for the job that requires these skills as, you know, the most important.
And get people to review your CV and your cover letter, right? So find someone who's in the field that you want to move towards, and then network with them and show them that. Because not only would you get actual like on the field advice of what someone in that person's company would be looking for, like how they would screen in candidates, right? You are also opening doors. You're by showing them what you have to offer. You're also putting yourself in the back of that person's head that if something ever opens up in his or her company, or he or her is aware of something, then they'll think of you. But definitely when you read your CV, so my CV has gone through like a million iterations since I last wrote it when I graduated. So but you need other people to give you that perspective. You can look at it over and over and it'll just look the same.
Yeah, thank you.
Lots of great advice. Thank you, everyone. There's one more question in the chat. I'm wondering if we can use the last few minutes just to touch on asking about if you have recommendations of the degree to pursue a master's, say, versus a PhD, and maybe what discipline. Any comments for your respective roles? What you might recommend to someone, say, in an undergrad who's deciding on their career path? What should they consider? I guess I know you can't tell them what to do, but Brett, do you have any comments for industry roles?
So like you don't necessarily, so for example, for a senior scientist job, right? You don't necessarily need to have a PhD, but if you only have a master's, then it requires some, maybe 3 to 5 years of previous industry experience. Or if you only have a bachelor's degree, then you maybe need 10 years of experience. It also doesn't, at least in AstraZeneca, it also doesn't affect your career progression too much. Like the head of our department, he does not have a PhD degree, but he's super knowledgeable and everyone respects him. So, yeah.
Okay, so kind of might depend. Abdelhamid, can you comment in your field?
So yeah, it depends. So my field, you don't need to have a PhD in the manufacturing at all. So if you decide to go to the manufacturing, master degree is sufficient. Plus, educate yourself about the regulation. It's gonna be perfect because in our facility, all the focus in the regulation. So if you are more knowledgeable in the regulation area, it's more important than anything else. So a master degree, stop there and look for a job.
Okay, great. And Alice, do you have any comments on this topic as well?
I think for my current role, the hard requirement is to have a PhD, just because of the nature of the kind of, it's a more of a pioneering kind of work, and I think they wanted someone who's able to, as you previously mentioned, to teach themselves how to learn. So. And I think that was a really important skill set to be honed down in the PhD. Not saying that masters don't have that, definitely you have that, but then doing a PhD gives you that much more time in addition to really, really hone down the skills. But that being said, I think I would not recommend an undergrad to go directly into the PhD program. The reason is because even if you've had as much research experience in your undergrad, you think you know what research is about, but you really don't until you've become a grad student. So a lot of people jump into a PhD and then they master out. It's because they realize research is not for them. So I do recommend going into a master's program. The best way is you test your water in the master's program. You're interested in the research. You're interested in research. You're interested in what you're researching on, and then you transfer to a PhD program, because that allows you to save time. That allows you to continue on what you want to do and get like a really beautiful list of publications, right? And if you discover that research is not for you, then you can get a master's and find internship positions from there. I don't think there's a limitation on what kind of job, like on how much you eventually earn as a master's versus a PhD. The difference is if you do the calculation, okay, this way, someone who has an undergrad degree, they enter industry right after. They spend 10 years earning a salary and then moving up the ranks, versus someone who spent 3 years doing masters, 7 years doing a PhD. Then at the end, you kind of have the same amount of money in your bank. So it kind of evens out. And that's why I say that you only do a PhD if you're passionate about research, not because you think after you've toughed it out, you're going to get a better job, a higher salary.
Mm-hmm. I love that, more like the calculated risk approach. And I think it's a good time for this particular student to really reflect on that and know what goals you're hoping to achieve in your career, and then make a decision wisely. We're starting to go a little bit over time here, so I'm conscious of that and want to wrap things up. So again, thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time and sharing your career paths and your stories with us today. It's been really insightful. We got to have a great look at not just your roles, but also the greater contributions that you're making to the ecosystem. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you to our audience members for joining in today. I hope you guys all are able to take something away from this session. And if not, I encourage you to join our LinkedIn group so that you can make more of these connections and keep making progress in your career paths. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.